Welcome to English 213, Writing About Writing, and Essay Structure. First, the basics of essay writing. Most academic essays must include a thesis statement that makes an argument, an introduction, body, and conclusion, consistent and purposeful paragraph structure. On to thesis statements. So, a thesis statement is the central argument a paper intends to make. It should be the largest claim in the essay, and it must introduce the subject and make a debatable point about that specific subject. A thesis cannot be a statement of fact or an unsupportable opinion, like a personal preference. Most of the time in academic essay writing, it is positioned at the very end of the introduction, so it is the last sentence that we see before we move on to our first body paragraph. It must be contestable. So this means that a thesis only works if someone could reasonably disagree with it, and there must be room for debate. It has to be supportable, which means you must be able to produce evidence meeting that evidentiary norms of a discipline to make a case for your position. It must be specific, so the thesis statement must be focused enough that it can be reasonably supported within the assignment's page length requirement. It should be substantive, so that means the stakes of the thesis must matter in some way. We call this the so what question. It must be conclusive, so the thesis should be the largest scale claim in the paper with all topic sentences supporting it. And finally, it should be elegant. This means that the thesis should be well written, clearly presenting your argument, and elegance is something that we take care of in revision often. Still thesis statements. Some strategies for constructing strong thesis statements might include: you can begin with a partial prompt. Sometimes that's all we need to get us to the page. So you can try this. Write, in this essay, comma, I will argue, ... Great. What will your essay argue? Simply fill in the blank. And then if the essay calls for it, you can always remove the partial prompt section. You should be left with a strong thesis statement that identifies the subject and establishes the parameters for the argument. Another option would be start with a research question and then turn it into a statement. So for example, a research question might look like this. How does Shara McCallum use language to establish a narrative persona in Mad Woman as Rasta Medusa? To convert that to a thesis statement, we might do this. Shara McCallum uses language to establish a narrative persona in Mad Woman as Rasta Medusa. So I know that the rest of my essay is going to go to support or prove how that statement is true. Moving on to introductions. Your introduction should hook the reader to begin, so that means that we want to encourage them to keep reading. And here are some basic strategies for accomplishing that. We can begin with a quotation. So if you can find something that sums up the entirety of your position, you may be able to open your paper with this. We can also begin with a question. So in setting up the problem or the issue or the dilemma that your thesis will respond to, it can be useful to start off with a question that gets to the heart of the matter. So if you choose this approach, you'll want to limit yourself to one or two questions. Too many questions can overwhelm readers, and that will turn them away. Another option would be to begin with a hypothetical, and this is when we show the reader the importance of the position with a what-if scenario. You can use this to show readers what consequences might befall the audience or society if they do not heed your argument. This can be useful when you are anticipating an audience who disagrees with you, but you do want to be careful. Again, these are some basic general strategies. Next, we can begin with an anecdote. This is a hypothetical situation, only it has the benefit of being real. You can often open or frame your paper with a story that shows the importance of the situation you're addressing. So think of this as a story-based element. Some kind of small incident or, again, anecdote that shows your own stake or personal connection to whatever the issue or argument is that you're making. Last, we can also begin with an analogy. It can sometimes be useful to compare a complex idea to something more common so that your reader will immediately understand. But in doing this, the key is not to let the comparison get too outlandish. Still introductions. So no matter what kind of hook we set, an introduction still must do these 4 things. It has to present the context, so offer any relevant background information necessary for the reader to make sense of the topic you've chosen or you're writing about. Address the so what question. This means, why are we reading this? Why are you writing it? That has to be clear up front. We have to give some sort of indication. And this can be tricky to do, but no reader wants to continue reading if they don't have at least some sense of why they should care about your argument. Next, we want to rephrase the primary research question into a statement, i.e., it must include a thesis statement. So in academic writing, having a clear thesis is key to any overall essay. Your thesis is the point where you're going to make, or the thing you hope to discover. And next, it has to provide a roadmap for your argument. So create a pre-established structure that tells your reader where the paper is going. And this gives you something to return to if you feel the progression of the argument is getting off track. So a roadmap sentence might look something like, by examining X, Y, and Z, we may come to a better understanding of whatever topic we've chosen. Conclusions. It's the last thing that your reader sees, and it must do these things. It needs to clarify the claims. So rephrase your claim, i.e. your thesis, in a short but meaningful way, emphasizing its importance. Do not repeat the main points of the paper verbatim. Assume your audience is smart enough to remember the rest of your paper. It needs to answer the so what question definitively. So at the end of your paper, ask yourself, so what? If you haven't already provided a clear answer, a substantial argument for why the topic deserves so much attention, then now is a good time to do so. And finally, the conclusion must say goodbye. So give the essay a sense of closure, a sense of coming full circle. Even if you end with a question, the reader should feel satisfied, like they've come to the actual end. Still under conclusions, here are 5 strategies for creating a strong conclusion. One option is to frame in terms of subject matter. So this echoes strategies employed in your introduction. If you began by telling a story or describing a historical event, you can end by returning to that same story or event. After reading your essay, readers may find the story or event to be much more meaningful. If necessary, you can explain to your readers how your paper should expand their understanding of the story or event. Next, we can frame in terms of style. If you don't want to go back to the same information you introduced in the beginning of the essay, but you opened with a style of writing different from the body, you can create a sense of cohesiveness by returning to that opening style. For example, if you open with a personal anecdote before launching into a technical discussion of a topic, you can end with another personal anecdote to frame your argument in a way that is easy for your reader to digest. Next, we can pose questions. So a good rhetorical question can sometimes open your topic up for future discussion. It may also help your readers extend the conversation beyond your essay. This is a particularly good strategy if your topic is so complex that you couldn't explore the entire issue in the space provided. You might end the paper by asking a question that draws the reader's attention to another aspect of the topic that merits further discussion or study. Next, we have a call to action. By challenging your readers to apply the points from your writing to their own lives, you can emphasize your essay's relevance and importance. Give clear suggestions for what your audience must do after reading your piece. And then finally, predictions. So this would be looking forward. You can argue that the issues from your paper deserve attention, predict what may happen if they are ignored, what will the ramifications be, and who it will affect. Moving on to paragraph structure for the body. Think of each paragraph of the body in an essay as a burger. Here's the basic burger construction. Think of your claim as the top bun. The claim is a topic sentence. And think of claims topic sentences much like mini thesis statements. Instead of at the overall essay level, we want to think about how our topic sentence is going to inform the direction of our paragraph. So your topic sentence should tell your audience what that paragraph is going to argue. Next, we need to back up our claim with some evidence from the specific text that we've chosen. So the evidence would be the meat or the veggie patty. This is any directly quoted, paraphrased, summarized source material that you're pulling in. Anything that's going to require a citation. And then finally, we have an interpretation. Think of this as the bottom bun. So the interpretation is entirely in your own words. And you're going to use the interpretation to tell your audience how the evidence that you just brought in connects back to, supports, or proves that topic sentence claim that you constructed. Now, let's think about writing about writing. So writing about writing as a beginning writer. Keep the focus on craft decisions the author makes. So for example, things like imagery, sensory details, language, tone, word choice, voice, character development, plot, etc. Analyze with the same critical eye as any literature student, but take the analysis one step further. Bring it back to the self, i.e., ask, how can I use techniques I've identified or observed in this author's work to improve or develop my own writing? What techniques can I borrow or steal? This is the thing that students most often forget when they're thinking about writing and writing as writers or beginning writers in something like a reading response. It's really important that we take that connection back to ourselves. How are we going to use these techniques? For us, it's very much a practical application. It pulls out of the theoretical. So let's think a little bit about the thesis statement that I came up with for Mad Woman as Rasta Medusa. So if I'm thinking about how Shara McCallum uses language to establish a narrative persona, I'm going to think about how I'm going to do that in my own work. Now I know that Shara uses a proper additional language in her poem called patois. So I want to think about how I'm using language and what sort of linguistic markers that I have as a writer, especially if I'm going to identify as a regional writer, which I do. So, and I know as an Appalachian regional writer and an Appalachian person, we have our own linguistic markers. So I want to think about how I can make an argument pulling those techniques back to myself. I want to think about how I can use these things in my own writing. So how am I going to use what I've picked up in McCallum's work in my own work? So I'm going to start making those connections in the interpretation part of my paragraphs in the body. So when I'm making analytical claims and I'm backing those up with evidence from the text, not only do I want to say how that evidence supports or proves my analytical claim, I then want to take it one step further in my interpretation and say how I'm going to use this technique in my own writing. So I would make an argument, or I would make in my interpretation, I would talk about how I would use that information, that new technique that I've just learned in my own writing to develop it. So how am I going to use my knowledge about Appalachian dialect and linguistic markers to inform my own sense of narrative persona, whether that's in terms of the I narrator, or whether I'm developing characters. That's it for this video. See you, love you, bye.